Before we get started, if you love shivery fairy stories, I really think you'll love my novel, The Ghost of Nothing. It's got that same haunted, magical, eerie vibe of this channel, but turned up to 11. It's available as an audiobook, ebook, paperback, and hardcover. Honestly, it's the best thing I've ever created, so if you like what I do and you haven't read it yet, I really think you're missing out on a special experience. Links are in the description. And now, on to the stories. I have a story to tell you. This is real, and it started more than 2 decades ago, and has continued up until as recently as last week. I was browsing YouTube with my wife. I'll call her Evie. She was in the room with me working on a sewing project when I happened to notice one of your videos. I decided to watch it, knowing Evie has an interest in fairy lore. We thought the video was great, and my wife told me I should submit my story to you. Here's the thing, though. It's not really my story so much as it is hers. I have to tell you about my wife and her friends. I've always had an interest in the paranormal. Bigfoot, aliens, Loch Ness Monster, ghosts, demons, all that jazz. I've had my fair share of experiences, and I consider myself a very open-minded person. But I never believed in fairies. I did, however, have this strange recurring dream from a very young age. In this dream, I would often be in what can only be described as a fairy forest. Tall, beautiful trees, sunlight streaming in, absolutely teeming with life. It felt warm and peaceful. In this forest, I was visited by a young woman. She wasn't human, but she wasn't exactly an elf either. She was the most beautiful being I had ever seen. And she did have pointed ears and long, dark, sort of purple-colored hair. Her face was also covered with markings that twisted like vines down from a jewel in the center of her forehead. She wore a dress of lavender color, decorated with lace and flowers. She always visited me in my dreams, but not always in that forest. Sometimes she would literally invade my dreams. She would just show up and talk to me. She told me she loved me, and she'd always loved me, and she was looking for me. Nice recurring dream, I thought, but just a fantasy. I had a hard time growing up. I was a heavy-set guy, and I struggled with depression. I was constantly bullied because of my size. Back then, nobody cared about mental health like they do now, so I just had to deal with it alone as best I could. I became very dark, jaded, and violent. In high school, I was the typical goth kid, always wore a heavy black trench coat to school, and I lived by this idea that if people didn't respect me, I was okay with making them fear me. That's just the kind of guy I was. I was miserable. I had an interest in performing, and I started doing theater at school. I was pretty good at it, and I usually got to play some really fun parts. One day during rehearsal, I was having a hard time, and I was by myself, brooding in the corner away from everyone else, when something unexpected happened. I heard a voice say, "Hello," and I looked up. And there she was, the literal girl from my dreams. Her hair was darker, her ears were round, the markings were gone, but it was her. I can't find the words to explain how I felt in that moment. All I knew was it was her, and I was completely in love with her from that moment on. And you want to know the really crazy thing? She had been dreaming about me, too. That's how I met my wife, Evie. We took things slow. We started out just being friends. This was new to both of us, and we were young. There was no need to rush things. It didn't take long before we grew closer and started dating. We were pretty inseparable throughout most of high school. It wasn't easy, though. We were very much an odd couple, and we stood out a bit. Me being the heavy-set, scary guy in the black coat, and she was the pretty honor roll student on the varsity cheerleading team. Other kids just didn't understand why we had feelings for each other. Varsity cheerleaders do not date the scary goth guy. The thing they didn't understand was Evie was just different. She grew up in Germany because both her parents were in the military. When their tour ended, she was raised in Massachusetts, and eventually her family moved to Southwest Michigan, which is where I'm from. Her whole family has a rich history of paranormal experiences, and Evie, having grown up in Germany and New England, had her whole childhood surrounded by old magic. Knowing all this, I probably shouldn't have been that surprised that not long after we'd started dating, things started to get pretty weird. I remember it started one night when I drove her home. I think we were at a friend's party and it was dark outside. I parked near her parents' driveway off to the side of the road, and we were just sitting in the car talking when I happened to notice that there were these big round mushrooms growing in her yard, and they formed like a perfect circle. "That's weird," I said to Evie. "I've never seen mushrooms grow in a perfect circle like that." "Oh, you mean the fairy circle?" Evie asked. "Fairy circle?" I asked skeptically with a smirk on my face. "Yeah, you've never heard of a fairy circle? It's where the fairies enter our world. Don't worry, though, they're very friendly." She said this matter-of-factly. Evie had this ability to see the world with childlike wonder, and she believed in some pretty fantastical things, even by my standards. I remember a conversation with her when she told me that not only was Santa Claus real, but she'd met him in Germany once, and he drove a red Volkswagen. She told me fairies are real. She talks to them all the time. They're her friends, and I'd better not be mean to them. I was doubtful. I told her I'd never seen anything to convince me that fairies existed. "Don't let them hear you say that," she said. I was amused by how worried she looked. I honestly thought this was just another one of her charming little quirks. Except she was right, as I would soon find out. It started small, as these things always do. My wallet disappeared, and I searched the whole house trying to find it, only to suddenly find it in the cookie jar, or sometimes in the refrigerator. I would be running late to class, and my car keys were gone, so I'd have to take the bus. Then I would get home, and the keys would be sitting right there in the middle of the living room floor. Once I had to turn in homework, and I opened my folder to find my papers neatly tucked inside, but ripped to shreds. Another time, I was playing a video game by myself, and suddenly the system switched off. I got up to turn it back on, went back to my seat, and the controller was missing, and I just couldn't find it. A lot of things started going missing around this time, like books, tools, money, stuff I use like every day. I went to the store and I bought new ones, but they would go missing the next day. So I told Evie about all these weird little things. She told me it was the fairies. I had offended them, and they wouldn't stop until I made a peace offering of something shiny or a thimble of milk. I just couldn't believe fairies were real, so I started rationalizing everything that had been happening. I was stressed, distracted, and being forgetful. This is what I was telling myself as I left her house. Walking toward my car, I passed the fairy circle, laughing at how ridiculous this all was. Then, my car wouldn't start. I turned the key and it sputtered. At this point, I was getting angry at how bad my luck had been lately and was trying to calm myself down. It was then that I heard a noise. It sounded like scratching from inside the dash. I leaned in, listening. It sounded like an animal moving around inside, like a mouse or a tiny squirrel. Then, suddenly, there was this little tiny light. At first, I thought it was a fire from inside the vents of the AC unit. It looked like a little light from a candle that somehow squeezed its way through the grates of the fan unit. Then it kind of popped out of the fan and hovered over the passenger seat. It moved around like a little firefly drifting lazily through the interior of my car. Fireflies are green, though, and this was a bright orangey red orb. This little bastard wandered right up to my face like something in a movie and stared me down. It took a moment for me to focus on the light, but I could just barely make out what looked like a humanoid form inside of it, but super tiny, like maybe half an inch tall. As soon as I realized what I was looking at, this thing winds back and then smashes into my nose as hard as it possibly could. It hurt like if someone flicked you in the nose with their finger. I covered my face, more out of shock than pain. The light vanished as soon as it bopped my nose and it was gone. Then the car started up just fine, like nothing was ever wrong. So I went home and found some shiny coins and put them out. I didn't have a thimble, so I put a small amount of milk in a tiny cup and left it out. "All right, truce," I said out loud, looking around the kitchen. I guess I had gotten the message. Fairies were real, and they meant business. I went to bed. The next morning, the milk was still there, but the coins were gone. Over the next couple of days, I started finding all my stuff that had been missing, and I thought the whole war with the fairies was over. Sometime later, I was at Evie's house, and we were just hanging out in her room, with the door open because parents. Now, Evie's family had a lot of animals, just a ton of cats and 2 dogs. She had 3 brothers, and there was no privacy in this house. So while we were chatting, I noticed a bluish-green light on her ceiling. I looked at it, and it suddenly darted away. I asked Evie if she saw it, and she did. She said, "Oh, that's just one of my little fairy friends." So while we were talking about it, one of the cats walks in. It was a little short-haired gray cat named Jojo, but everyone called him Zombie Cat because he was a particularly gruesome hunter who had a propensity for eating mice and squirrel brains and leaving their bodies out for everyone to find. It's important to note that these were indoor-outdoor cats, and none of them wore collars or anything, and they had almost full run of the house. Anyway, Zombie Cat loved me the most out of everyone, and was always snuggling against me and jumping in my lap when I was over. I assume that's what he was coming into the room for because he'd heard my voice. Zombie Cat got maybe 2 feet into the room and froze. He crouched down into hunter position, and his head started darting around the room. Then, suddenly, Zombie Cat pounced. I saw a flash of fangs, and the cat flew through the air and landed with his mouth closed. It looked like he caught something. He shook his head, and I swear to God, Evie and I both heard a jingling sound. I remember this cat didn't wear a collar or anything on him, so what was making that noise? I would describe it like a tiny little bell sound. Zombie Cat shook his head again, and again we heard this strangely etheric, jingling noise. Then the cat bit down, and we heard a very loud crunch. No more jiggling sound. The cat turned around and walked out of the room like a proud hunter off to enjoy his prize. "Evie, did your cat just murder a fairy?" I asked in absolute astonishment. Evie said, No, Jojo chose to be your familiar. Your cat murdered a fairy." Great. Now I had blood on my hands. Years passed. Evie got a full-ride scholarship to a prestigious college. I got a job working security and paying my way through community college. I was down on my luck, seriously. Everything that could go wrong in my life went wrong. Meanwhile, Evie was just living her blessed life. We did the long distance thing. It sucked, and I would never wish it on my worst enemy, but we managed to make it work. Meanwhile, all my stuff was constantly going missing. Doors were opening on their own, stuff was flying off my desk. I was seeing little shadow figures out of the corner of my eyes, and seeing and hearing little brightly colored orbs making little jingling sounds. The little offerings stopped working, and I just learned to live with it all. I got deep into the paranormal community doing ghost hunts, researching UFO sightings. I got really good at banishing spirits from haunted houses, and a lot of my nights were spent running around graveyards chasing demons. But that's a whole other story. As far as the fairy phenomenon, I eventually just stopped getting mad about my stuff disappearing. And I found the less attention I gave to their little pranks, the more they'd leave me alone. I think they literally just got bored of tormenting me and moved on. Finally, Evie came home from college and we decided to get married. She knew about all the occult and paranormal stuff that I'd gotten into, and it scared her. So we made a deal. Once we got married, I'd give it all up and we'd live a normal life. But if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm a severely arrogant, stubborn guy who doesn't know when to leave well enough alone. So I agreed to her terms, provided she renounced her connection to the fairies, and they stayed away from us. No more ghost aliens Bigfoot for me, no more fairies for her. Seemed perfectly fair to me. She told me she'd do her best, but they weren't gonna like it. My attitude after so many years of torment was, I don't care what they do or do not like. They're nothing more than a menace. We got married on Friday the 13th, because of course we did. We moved into this tiny little apartment together that was on the first floor of the complex. Evie put flowers in the windows and it was nice. We were happy together, and things were quiet for a while. Then one day I came home from work. I parked my car and started walking down the sidewalk to the entrance. I happened to glance down at a patch of grass just outside our window, and guess what I saw? A perfect circle of mushrooms, just like the ones I saw at her mom and dad's house all those years ago. I called Evie at work and yelled into the phone, "Your fairy friends are back!" I was livid. I felt betrayed. I was working a 9-to-5 boring job, having given up all my adventures into the paranormal and trying to live a normal life for my wife, and these little heathens come back out of the blue. Evie thought it was hilarious. She said she couldn't convince them to leave, but she assured me they promised to stay outside and leave me alone as long as I was nice to them. Yeah, right. That was gonna last. Spoiler, it didn't. We started going through all the same stuff again. Cupboards in the kitchen would randomly pop open, drawers would slide open, and silverware would fly out. Full-on poltergeist activity in the apartment. We would wake up in the middle of the night and see some strange figures standing in the room that would dart away into the shadows as soon as you looked at them. And of course, we always saw these multicolored orbs zipping around, shades of red, green, blue. I think I saw a white one during one winter at some point. It was non-stop in that apartment from that point on. The groundskeepers would come by and mow the grass and destroy the fairy circle. Things would calm down, but then 2 to 3 days later, the circle would grow back, and it would start all over again. I remember one night sleeping with my arm hanging off the edge of the bed when I felt a tiny little hand grab my wrist and yank me right off the bed. I flipped on the light. I couldn't find anyone there. Evie had her experiences too. She told me how one night she woke up to use the restroom and bumped into someone standing in the middle of the bedroom. She said whoever this was, they had to have been almost 10 feet tall. At that point, she was so desensitized to it all, she just walked past it and continued on with her business. Then she came back to bed and went to sleep like nothing happened. I have a friend named Rich who would often come over to the apartment and hang out with us. He was interested in hearing a lot of my old stories of weird stuff, like everything I'd encountered as a kid and some of the investigations I'd been a part of. We would talk about this stuff for hours. One night he asked me about all the paranormal encounters and adventures I'd been on, if I missed any of it. Everything but the fairies, I told him. They won't leave us alone. He laughed and thought I was telling a joke. Evie was sitting next to me on the couch, and she also laughed, knowing full well I was telling the truth and where this was going. I'm going to stop you right now, I told Rich before he could say anything. They're real. They're here in this apartment, and they are the meanest little bastards I've ever encountered. They aren't evil, they don't hurt us, they just torment me because they think it's funny. I told Rich the stuff they did to torment me. I mentioned that, according to Evie, they lived in the kitchen cupboards and they would burst out from time to time. Rich was extremely skeptical, but just as he was stating he could accept a lot of things, but not fairies, the kitchen cupboard right next to him burst open and nearly smacked him in the head. I'll never forget the look on his face. His eyes were huge and round. His jaw nearly hit the floor. He slowly backed away toward the door and went home without another word. A couple years later, the price of our rental was getting too ridiculous, and after doing the math, Evie realized it was cheaper to just buy a house in town. So we found this little blue home of ours, which of course Evie had been dreaming about and was shocked to find out was real. Our new house had a large front and backyard with massive trees in the front and a small garden of lilacs in the back, which Evie says the fairies love. Of course, no more than a couple of weeks after moving, a massively perfectly round fairy circle appeared in the front yard, and then a second smaller one in the back. I never learned anything, so I mowed both those suckers down as soon as I saw them. They kept growing back, and I kept mowing them down. And that went on for a couple more years before eventually they stopped growing back on a regular basis. Now I just ignore them when they pop up, which, interestingly enough, has not been nearly as often as it used to be. Anyway, I recently turned 40. Evie and I have been together for almost 23 years now. Stuff still disappears around the house and then reappears in the strangest places. Cupboards still pop open, orbs still fly around the house, and I keep seeing little shadow figures out of the corner of my eye. I think in a way Evie's friends and I have made peace with each other. I think we've been fighting over her all this time. I think that in their own way they love her just as much as I do. And at some point they realized I make her happy and decided to let up a bit, because this stuff doesn't happen nearly as often as it used to. You know, when you live with this kind of stuff as long as we have, you start seeing interesting patterns and seemingly random occurrences. Synchronicities, if you will. I think that the universe has a language. Call it God if it pleases you, but there's a design to things. Things occur in a strange way that tells a story if you pay attention. And I think that whatever intelligence is out there holding the threads of reality together communicates to us through coincidence. It tells us when we're on the right path and encourages us to keep going. And at times, it has a wonderful sense of humor. I hadn't spoken about Evie's friends in years, right? Then I was sitting on the couch watching YouTube, and I saw this video about fairies from Scary Fairy Godmother. And my wife and I watched it. We had a good laugh. We thought about our lives together, feeling grateful for everything we've experienced together, even these mischievous little bastards that have tormented me for more than 2 decades now. Because now I have this fun experience that I get to share with people. And if they believe me, great. If they don't, that's okay too, because I think it's a fun story. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was my old friend, Rich. We chatted for a little bit, just catching up, and started to get the idea that something was bothering him. We hadn't talked since we'd last seen each other over at my house a couple weeks earlier. Mind you, I never mentioned the video we had been watching earlier. It even mentioned fairies, or that Evie told me I should submit this story to you. And guess what Rick says? I've got a problem. A lot of stuff has been going missing around my house, and my cupboard doors keep popping open. I think Evie's friends followed me home. So that's it. That's my fairy story. It's 100% real to the best of my recollection. Please feel free to share it with your viewers. I'll let you know how things go with Rich if I get any further updates from him, because this story is still ongoing. Thanks for watching, and happy Halloween! And a huge thank you to the person who submitted his story for this one. It was a great story, and I really enjoyed narrating it. I hope we get a part 2 at some point. Let me know your thoughts on this story down in the comments. Have you had a similar lifelong experience with the fairies or some other paranormal phenomenon? I find it really interesting. It's strange that fairies and other paranormal entities seem to get attached to certain places and also certain people. We've all heard of haunted houses, but it seems like there are haunted humans too, people who just seem to be haunted themselves wherever they go, whatever they do with this sort of activity. Anyway, let me know your theories on this kind of thing and your experiences too down in the comments. Speaking of spooky stories, I hope you'll check out my fairy fantasy novel, The Ghosts of Nothing, if you haven't already. It's a supernatural tale about a girl from a haunted town that turns out to have more of a fairy problem than a ghost problem. The fairy world of the novel is based on my research into fairy lore. It's won some awards and it's been getting great reviews. And it's really perfect for this time of year. So if you enjoy the stories I share here, definitely make sure to check it out. It's also available as an audiobook on Audible if you prefer to listen rather than read. For a chance to win a free copy of the audiobook, subscribe to one of my newsletters. Every month I randomly select a subscriber for the free giveaway. It's completely free to join. I don't send out that many emails, just once a month if you join Fairy Lights, and you'll find the sign up link on my website and in the description below. If you have a story of your own, I love to hear it. You can submit your fairy experiences through the form on my website, where you'll also find the mailing list sign up there. There's 2 mailing lists, Fairy Lights, which is dedicated to fairy lore and this channel, and the Shaken Tree, which is dedicated to my book and my writing more broadly. So you can sign up for either or both if you'd like. And it doesn't matter which one you're signed up to, you're still in the draw for the free audiobook. A huge, huge thank you, as always, goes out to all my supporters on Patreon, as well as everyone who joined the channel, made a one-time donation through PayPal or Ko-fi, or subscribed to the paid version of the newsletter. Your support keeps this work going, and I appreciate you all so, so much. If you'd like to support this channel, all the support options are in the description. If you enjoy this video, if you like this channel, please take a second to leave a comment, like, share, and definitely subscribe if you're new. This really helps the channel grow. And please take a second to hit the bell because YouTube has gotten really bad at notifying people when I release a new video. So if you hit the bell, at least you can know for sure that YouTube will notify you. So make sure to just take that extra step. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.